Soccer-Wise is back. David Goss, Tom Bogert here with you on a Thursday morning. I don't even know what to say. This is, of course, your US Open Cup reaction show. This is going to be an MLS weekend preview show. If you're listening to the podcast, you're going to hear Joe Lowry, one of our favorites, coming up soon. He was on the ground at Phoenix Rising against Houston Dynamo. Walk us through a little bit about what he saw in person. Help us preview the weekend as well. So if you're watching live, you got to go to the podcast to find that. Tom, we started the last show, and I think someone sent us a side talk video of Bing Bong, and they said basically the live watch of the Open of Soccer-Wise. What are they going to say now?
Smoking in the Boston pack, baby!
What do you do now?
It's the data. The data says the shot's
going to hit those shots, man. Those shots are coming.
It's the data says, well, actually, the shot quality was like a 1.3. So they got 1.3 points every time they took that shot. So I don't think that they calculated that into the final score. I'm going to need to see the last 2-minute report from the NBA officials to tell me if they added the math right on the, that was a 2.1 shot. That was a 1.4 shot. Yeah.
Fact. 3 officials, I think that in the 11 games they've refereed the Celtics this year, they were 11-0. The Knicks took 10 free throws in this game. And yet somehow persevered. It's almost like heart matters. It's almost like spirit matters. It's almost like the grind is real. You prepare for what you do. It's the Tom Bogert special. He's in the mine. He's eating lasagna pizzas. He's eating ziti slices. He's crushing Miller Lights. And when the lights come on, he is ready to shine. That's what this is here for.
Dude, the only thing I'm worried about is bro, we could have gotten the 72nd overall pick, but we traded it for Mikal Bridges. I don't know if we're gonna recover from that.
The franchise is over.
I remember one time Matt Doyle watched a preseason game between the Knicks and the Wizards and assured us that Bridges was bad. So just the mental fortitude to be able to come back from losing on such a big stage of the Washington Wizards in preseason.
Yeah.
To do this, it's just we're going to need a 30 for 30 on that Wizards preseason game.
And I do think the Nets Open Cup run in about 5 years with all those draft picks, all those 8th graders that are going to really break through for them is going to be impressive. I do think it's something that when you're looking at Westchester SC and Brooklyn FC coming in, they're going to have to worry about the Nets in a U.S. Open Cup game. We'll just talk about the playoffs, though. That's what we'll do.
Yeah.
And
when you're such a blue blood franchise like ours, that's all that matters.
Yeah. Can't think of other competitions. It is. My brain is broken. I haven't slept basically in 24 hours because I've just been on a high. I was telling Tom this before we started, but my obviously the Knicks are near and dear to my heart. My Knicks experience is about a 24-hour cycle because my oldest friend, who is as big a Knicks fan as I am, lives in England. And so he sleeps through games and then wakes up, watches them before work, and then messages me. So if things like yesterday happened or when the Knicks traded for Cat, things like that, right as I'm ready to go to sleep, so I was sitting in bed, watched the Phoenix-Houston game, did not put on the San Jose-Sacramento game, did not feel like it was competitive. I'm watching that, and you're like, okay, Jack McGlynn, stunner. This game's starting to close up. I'm just about ready to go sleep. I have posted 900 Instagram stories. I have sent 500 Blue Sky messages making fun of the Celtics or pumping up the Knicks. I'm just there. And then I get a message from him. Are you kidding me? This team? And now I'm back. All of a sudden at 1:45 in the morning, I'm back around on the other side and ready to run. So it was a life experience for sure. You, of course, professionally host a morning show sometimes. So you had some different responsibilities.
We could have had a phone call at 4 a.m. when I was waking up and you were going to sleep.
Yeah, we probably should have done a recap. Either way, though, when you had that coffee this morning, it just tastes a little bit. Yeah, that's that feeling. That's the feeling of victory. And by the way, the Mecca opens on Saturday, so the real Garden is about to come into play. Anyone who wants to talk any smack to us, feel free. The door is always open. I am here for you at any time you want. We have a bunch of U.S. Open Cup action to dig into, and we've got some really good games on the docket, by the way, for this weekend in MLS, which I think it's one of those with Open Cup where you don't look towards the weekend, and then we just sat down to get ready for this, and you take a look at the schedule, like, oh. So there's some good games to go there as well. And as I said, we'll have Joe Lowry on the podcast to help to dig into some of this. The big storyline is the big storyline, though. It is not one individual game. In the round of 16 matches played between MLS teams and lower division sides, 3 third division teams, 1 MLS Next Pro, 2 USL League One, and then, again, math with me on this show, 13 USL Championship teams. MLS teams went 15 of 16 in not their return to US Open Cup, because they never actually technically fully withdrew, and not a full return, because not every team is back. But there is no other storyline to hit than the full dominance of MLS teams. And I would say on Tuesday night, we probably wouldn't have worded it this way, right? You had 2 games go to extra time. You had tight games across the board. It felt like, okay, kind of normal. Sometimes the ball will bounce this way, sometimes it won't. Then you only had 1 game go to extra time on Wednesday night. You had the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. Shout out to the Hounds. All hail the Hounds. We will get into that game. And then you just had some pure dominance, some blowouts. Morgan asked us not to talk about the Florida Derby. That one's going to be a tough one to avoid. And shout out to Mike in the chat, who we absolutely love, one of the best at the Orlando Lions Den podcast. But you had these blowouts. Tom, does it give you pause? Or are you talking to anyone saying, oh, this makes people feel differently than they did 2 days ago, let alone a year or 2 ago?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's just nothing new in terms of, I guess, the golf and quality. And, like, again, that's not a knock on USL at all. That's just the nature of these leagues, and particularly with the difference in spend and infrastructure and everything else between MLS and the USL Championship, different than, let's say, the Bundesliga and the 2 Bundesliga, or the Premier League and the Championship. It is just different. So it's like, it's nothing new. And I think that some years, like you said, Goss, like, hey, maybe a couple of, like, last night, Philly beat Indy 11 in penalties. Like, in another year, maybe that would have been, 4 or 5 of 16 that got through. So it was a lower number. I don't think that this means every year we're going to be looking at it and thinking this way. But this is definitely lower than I would have expected. I would have thought for a handful. But here we are. There were a couple hard-fought games. And like you said, there was more than a few blowouts. Like, the Orlando, like the Red Bulls, DC Charleston, like Charlotte, North Carolina. And I know that game went to extra time, so that's different. But they ran out of steam when they got past the 90 minutes. So
I think, to me, that is the most telling thing we saw. And I'm curious what Joe saw on the ground, but the depth. And so the extra times actually played into this, whatever you want to call it, narrative or reality, which is the depth across an MLS roster is just so much greater than what a USL Championship team has, that not only could you rotate the team, Tom's being checked on to make sure he's alive because he's been screaming.
Probably somebody's, like, I think Tony Miola is on the other side of this wall recording the podcast. And I'm sure we're just going to be banging on the wall
McCutcheon, baby. This is Jersey Love right now.
Let's go.
Tell Tony to come on in. But so that depth, I think, it was the depth and ability to rotate and still put together strong performances for MLS teams, but especially late in games. For Austin FC to make the comeback, for North Carolina and DC to get over the line in extra time, for Houston. Like, Jack McGlynn came off the bench in this game in place of Eric Duenas, who's probably a high-level USL Championship starter, if not a star, on a team if he was there. And so that depth, I think, really showed. I think part of it is some credit to the academy setup because, we've got the Caraballo love. We'll talk Kevin Sullivan coming up. I thought Brooklyn Reigns was phenomenal once again. Someone I talked about on Tuesday's show, and way more examples of that because a lot of teams, like Caleb Porter talked about, are using Open Cup as an opportunity to blood the 2 players that they have in Next Pro and in the academy in this pro environment.
And we're just going to be saying a lot of the things we've already said. But on that point, this is why all 30 or 27 American teams should always be in the Open Cup.
Yeah.
Use your academy. Use your second team. Use your bench players. I understand, like, the match days makes it a little bit difficult. Use your full squad. Like, again, first of all, let teams do what they want. If they want to play their starting 11, sure, go ahead. Good luck. But all these teams have enough players, if not just on the first team, but in the second team, in the academy, that the first few rounds of the Open Cup, you play all of your kids, you play all of your bench, you play all your rotation guys, and then you're still alive in the quarterfinals. Then that's when the first team starts, or the first team starters. Like, it's just so frustrating that this is how it should be. It's not that complicated.
Yeah. And I would say you probably get a lot of payoff for those young players. The experience they get here is the experience you want. Next Pro is not fully there, right? This is the point of the original setup of having two teams go into the USL Championship, right? Because you wanted your young players to go to Pittsburgh and experience the fans against them and experience these players playing for something that's bigger than them. You want them to play against Omaha with a little bit of pressure that you have to be the big dog and you're supposed to win and everything else like that. And I think there's a number of examples in this round, Nico Tsakaris getting minutes against Sacramento, where you saw the learning moments for these young players that you want them to experience. And so you lost that for half the league, basically, right? Didn't get the opportunity to do that. And then you lost that as well because you don't get as many rounds of this because you don't have as many teams. So you would have probably had more MLS teams come in the previous round and then the better MLS teams come in this round, and you would have had more games in this. Now, we'll talk about fixture congestion, and obviously you get into CBA stuff, which is a small part of this, of like getting players into that first team for these games and whatnot. I think all of that is very fixable if the league wants to do it, which is if you pay people what they're worth and what they're valued, they're probably okay with having more soccer games played at a high level and helping build up the environment around all of this. But you see situations, I mean, the Orlando one just because it keeps popping up because Tampa is a high-level USL Championship team, even though it's been a tough start to the year and they fire their manager. But you rotate Ramiro Enrique into the team. So this is a fully fledged international signing that you actually thought was going to be the starter. That's your rotation into the squad. And I don't know if that depth feels different than in the past. I don't know if maybe MLS teams across the board have actually done a little better with international signings, where in the past this was Gonzalo Verón and you're like, well, Gonzalo Verón sucks and they just blew that signing, and maybe we have more examples that teams didn't. Or this is the reality, which is, I think if you look back at some failed signings, you look at 2 goals in an Open Cup and you're like, oh, I forgot about that game and I forgot about that performance. And so I think teams have done this in the past, and maybe I just didn't remember because we hadn't seen a full MLS teams in a US Open Cup in a while. So I think that depth stood out, the depth and quality, and then obviously entrusting some of these academy players. And what I love about this setup, and we can start to talk about Kevin and Carball and all of this, is I've said this a million times. Playing 11 kids, though, is tough. Like, no one can lean on anyone. So you get these players in these groups with Ali Bedoya getting starts and Cesar Araujo getting starts alongside these players. And it's like, that's the perfect opportunity for these players to come into a game and just, if they do their job, it's enough. They don't have to be bigger than themselves. They don't have to find the game. And that's the right way to introduce players. And I think we saw a decent example of that for a chunk of these teams over the course of this week. One of the complaints has been that NYCFC didn't play a Maxi Carrizo in this round. They didn't play some of their homegrown players. And they were the only MLS team to lose. They lost on a 96th minute corner kick header in a game that had plus 5 minutes of stoppage time. So basically the last kick of the game on the banks of the, I don't know, I'm just going to say Cuyahoga. I don't know the name of any of the rivers in Pittsburgh, but I know they all exist and they're all there. And it was an epic moment. And it lines them up now with a potential, or not a potential, it lines them up with a next round game against Philadelphia. But it was the lone cup set that we got. I titled the show No Sets, because I didn't know how to word the lack of cup sets in this one. And it gave us that juice for a little bit early on this Wednesday of like, oh, this might be coming.
Yeah, that was an earlier game, and like what an end to the game. Like, so as you said, like, so there was Tanya Vasevich got sent off in the 78th minute when it was 0-0, and then the goal comes on a corner kick. Comes from 2 substitutes. The player who drew the red card was a substitute. The player who scored, Edrock, was a substitute. It's a really nice header, and like just those scenes were awesome. It's like, all right, like what else do we have tonight? Well, we had nothing else tonight in terms of upsets and stuff like that. There's some really good games. Austin FC with a pretty strong starting 11, including Guzuni and Vasquez. We're down 2-0 to El Paso at home.
Yeah.
They ended up coming back and winning 3-2 with 3 goals in the last 20 minutes. So, Yeah, there was some potential. There's some hope for like some of these fireworks, some of these cup sets that we love about cup competitions, and ultimately fizzled out. And the Pittsburgh Riverhounds stand alone.
And the Riverhounds, of course, Bob Lilly, a legend in the game's been around this block numerous times, understands how to keep teams in tight lines, understands how to keep the game in front of them. NYCFC, it's been a convo of the whole year. Lack of that killer instinct, lack of that final ball. When you talk about depth, this is not one of the teams you think of where you're like, oh, yeah. No, you have a second option at this position, especially in the attack, to be game changers. They are struggling to find that at the MLS level. So to bring it into Open Cup, it's kind of one of the ones you would have targeted and said that they would probably struggle in a moment like this. And that was the lone upset that we saw. As you said, they now will play against the Philadelphia Union, which is cool, right? This is the exact matchup that you want. Philly against Pittsburgh. We can pull a Nick Kroll skit out of here somewhere. It's one of my favorite skits of all time. I'll send it to you later. And anyone who knows. I assume everyone from Pittsburgh and Philly already knows. And this is the exact type of rivalry match that you want. This is why you want this cup and this opportunity. And because we haven't had MLS teams, that was part of why I think on Tuesday I was so excited. Was in Canada, you're seeing like the same matches over and over. It's a smaller country with less teams, but because they regionalized it, it's the same over and over. And we had Oakland Roots when we talked to them going into their home opener. They were like, yeah, it's really cool what El Farolito is doing, but we don't want to play them for like a third straight time.
Yeah.
So the regionalization, you lose some variance, although clubs keep coming in. But because we've been away from this now for 2 years of having it, it was exciting to see all these teams on the field at the same time and to get matchups. And now this is the lone big one. Although we will have an all-Texas affair in the next round in Austin against Houston. You mentioned Austin able to have the comeback victory. Some other big ones that stood out to me, of course, Kevin Sullivan getting his first start for the Philadelphia Union. I think Jonathan Tannenwald put it out that his father had ended up playing in Open Cup. Maybe his grandfather had as well all the way back in the day. Right, and obviously Quinn has. So, yeah, third generation, fourth in the family to play in a U.S. Open Cup. It's football heritage, baby.
That was really cool. And look, he lasted all 120 minutes. They needed penalties, but they get through on penalties. And I hope that this means he starts the next game against Pittsburgh. So, again, to go back to what we were talking about before, this is, I don't blame Philly for not starting him in MLS play. They are flying. They have plenty of options in the position. Quinn is undroppable. Indiana Vasilev has been very, very good. Yeah. There are other this is the obvious point to get young. And again, Kevin Sullivan is one of one at the moment, right? It should have been for Maxi Carrizo. It should have been for other players. Or even if you look on this Philly team, David Vasquez gets his first start. I hope that both of them start again against Pittsburgh in the next round. Kevin Sullivan, from what I've seen, I didn't get to watch the game. He looked solid. He had the moments. The numbers look good. You know, I hate to boil it down to a foot mob rating, but positive foot mob rating, stuff like that. It's a good way to start for a kid who's 15.
And again, for a team where they don't have as much depth, I think you'd say, as other MLS teams, but one, they want to push their academy players into the team. So you're able to get Rick a starting goal who they believe in a ton. You're able to get David Vasquez into the group as well. Kevin gets the start, but you get Damiani another start. Right, this is a guy who wants to find his feet, who's looking to get comfortable in this group. There's a big expectations on his shoulders. He comes in. Jesus Bueno, who I still think is an MLS level starter, he gets a start in this one. So that's the advantage for a game like this. And Ali Bedoya gets the start, gets the goal in the 6th minute, still has it. Fun to watch, and that's the crazy dichotomy of this team. You have Bedoya at 37 on one wing, and you have Kevin Sullivan at 16? 15 on the other wing? No, he's still 15?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, he's 15 until he's 16.
No way.
Give or take.
And then after that?
Yeah, give or take.
And then after that, he might be 17. We'll try and call Weeby in from the road and see if we can get an update on this. I know he's a bit of an expert. And then Caraballo, as we said, helping 2 goals in the domination against Tampa. Orlando didn't play with their food. They got the work done early. They dominate up 3-0 at halftime and just put the game away. And I think for a club that's looking to contend across multiple competitions, they are now 9 unbeaten across all competitions, are Orlando. And I think they feel like they've got a shot to push towards the top of the Eastern Conference. We'll talk about that coming up. This was the type of performance you want to see going into their building, a ton of juice for Tampa coming into this long homestand after not having their building open and all this celebration and everything else going on. I think for Orlando, that's the type of performance you want. And Carballo's been a difference maker. He was a difference maker in the game against NYCFC in MLS play. He's been good again going to the GA Cup and helping them win it. He's been good in MLS Next Pro. And so to see him continue that at that next step is awesome. And you could have a right side of homegrowns. For a club that has been starving for homegrown minutes, you could start games with Freeman and Caraballo along the right wing going forward. Like, that is mind-blowing, and it opens up a ton of possibilities for them to move this roster around and maybe get a little more depth at central midfield, whatever it is, as they go forward. Shout out to former New York Red Bull 2 legend and Rutgers grad, Joey Zielinski, for a big-time goal for St. Louis. Joey, you're a good kid. You're a good kid. Tell Tony that Joey had a good goal. Has he seen it? Pone, have you seen it?
The knock on the wall.
It was an epic goal for St. Louis, the opening goal. As I said, Red Bull Academy kid who ended up getting drafted out of Rutgers to St. Louis, has been in their next pro team, gets into the first team for this one. Xiao Klaus gets a goal in this one. Omaha have a history of being giant beaters, and normally they let teams beat themselves. Like, they find that perfect balance of extending themselves but not too much. St. Louis, this is a good day for them. And this is for a club that can't score goals. Maybe this is something that they can use to sort of push themselves going forward.
Exactly. And that's kind of the hope. Again, I feel like I'm just going to keep on reiterating, because like any game by game breakdown isn't, I don't think, necessarily wise, but like it's the overall picture and like what it can mean going forward, and these are the tenets that you take for it. You get a good performance, whether it's individually or collectively, you get a couple goals, and look, like when you're playing lower league teams, you're expecting to beat them, and you're expecting to play well, you're expecting to carry the game. It gives you more of these reps and options and goals and performances. So it's a good one to keep it moving and keep it moving forward. But again, like, I don't know if that's going to directly translate, but it certainly doesn't hurt.
So we get in the next round. And in the end, by the way, San Jose closing out 2-1 in the end against Sacramento. They were up 2-0, riding pretty high. The red card changes things. Sacramento didn't score until like the 95th or 96th minute. And there was the craziest goal you will ever see in the Dallas AV Alta game, in which Leal, I think is his name, plays a long ball too far, or is trying to chip the goalie. It bounces about 40 yards from goal. Colito mistimes it, doesn't understand it. He starts backtracking. The bounce goes over his head and in. It made it 1-1 at the time. It was a good bounce back game for Dallas after the mauling in San Diego. They have had the weirdest 12 to 14 days we've ever seen, to go to Miami, come from behind, win, go to San Diego, get smoked, and now win this Open Cup game in bizarre fashion. I will say, and this is unfortunate coming out of the whole thing, which is we, and I think people that are fans of Soccer-Wise and in our community are obviously not the norm, which is why I appreciate everyone. We were also devastated about what's happened to Open Cup. We are so excited about it. I do not think the crowd showed that in the MLS markets. And I think that's part of what's been hard about this, is like you see the excitement in the non-MLS markets. But I think for the most part, I think Philly was 50% attendance. St. Louis, a city that, full credit, like packs the building for a Next Pro game every year. FC Dallas, it did not feel like a huge crowd out there for that game. And I get it. Like, it's not as exciting on your side to potentially see your team get upset. And depending on travel, you're only going to get X amount of away fans on weekdays. I don't know if that's turning this into weekends. I don't know if that's trying to force more games out of MLS stadiums so that there is that little bit of extra excitement. The problem is not everyone owns their venue. So you get into, well, we don't know if we're going to qualify. So are we really going to put a hold on this stadium for this date that we don't know we're going to be in, and all that other stuff. So I think there's all these flaws inside of this. It's still a really fun competition. I still really enjoyed it. I've been excited the whole time. Obviously, the Des Moines Menace thing was great, but it wasn't the only one, right? AV Alta and Portland Heart of Pines, like starting their one Knoxville, opening a new building. Like, there's been a lot of cool things that have happened in this competition, and that's the potential that exists every time because the sport's growing, and you're going to keep adding clubs across all these leagues or adding more leagues. unfortunately or fortunately, whatever it is. And this is a really good way for like more people to learn about it and to expose all of it. And the CBS broadcast around it was very cool. I think I'm contractually required to say that because Tom is currently
physically in the building. Yeah.
The chat is saying
did very well.
The chat is saying, well, the CBS will let Tom out of the pit once he confirms 20 transfer rumors that you are inside of. If you're not watching on YouTube. Okay, sorry. If you are watching on YouTube, you have to go to the podcast now to listen to Joe Lowry, who I'm going to be interviewing later, and we'll put it out as a full show about his thoughts. Tom, let's talk about your weekend thoughts, not Joe's. Let's talk about some of the stuff we wanted to dig into. And let's start with the Daniel Gazdag contract news, because obviously transfer window's closed, but this is a huge deal for Columbus. And the reason they made the trade was for him to be a permanent part of this group going forward. The reason he pushed his way out a little was because he wanted this deal. And I think it should be comforting for Columbus fans that this got done.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that like the T's weren't crossed and the I's weren't dotted at the time of the trade, but I believe on this show I was saying that part of this is going to be a new contract. So glad to get that done. Glad for it to be official and no questions about it. Again, I don't think anybody was asking any questions about it because I think it was understood.
But Lucho's put us in a place where like nothing means anything. Sometimes.
I would also, and like again, this isn't a gossip, like just a wider sports thing. And again, we're talking about NBA all the time. Usually you sign a contract, then ask for a trade. I know that that's not the case all that often in soccer.
Kevin Durant going to the Celtics, baby. Get more losers in the building.
Losers. So yeah, speaking of a winner, Daniel Gazdag. I like. It's good for this to be done. It's good for this to be announced. And so it's Rossi and Gazdag as your attacking cornerstones for now. Probably use that last DP spot on a center forward, and I'll kind of take it back to like talking to Issa Tall and Wilfred Nancy after the trade, and they were like, look, like, yeah, DP9, like we don't look at it that way. We look at a profile. We look at Daniel Gazdag is going to be a goal scorer and score goals. Like, I still think it ends up as a DP9 when it happens, but they don't conform to some of those norms, and they care about qualities more than like traditional positioning. So that all being said, these two are two of your three attackers, and then you build from there.
I will add in, so the deal is guaranteed through 27 with an option for 28. He's 29 years old, so it's perfect timing, right? It's through his prime. It also may be for a player who plays in a World Cup in your country, and that's both for Columbus and for potential sell-on value later. Like, he has been in and around the Hungary national team. 900 teams make the World Cup now, so Hungary has a potential to do it. So all of that makes sense. He was out with an injury this weekend. They're hoping that he'll be available coming up this weekend, which is for a huge one. It's Philadelphia against Columbus, two of the top three teams in the Eastern Conference, hands down.
Homecoming games in Philly. Gazdag returns.
Ooh, Philly fans, loving fans. This is going to be a good one for everyone involved. It's this clash of styles that we've seen. I still go back to Nance's first game with Columbus was on the road at Philly when there was expectations that Philly were going to be an MLS Cup contender. They smoked Columbus, and you came out of it being like, oh, actually, I think Columbus has the idea. But Philly was a step too far for them to contend at that point. And obviously, the world has changed a lot since. I think now this is a barometer for Philly. Can Philly do what they've done at a high level against this Columbus group? I think the key will be whether it's Quinn Sullivan and Vasilev on the outside, all of whoever it ends up being on the edges of that midfield. Can they win that battle, right? You should have an extra number in that area. Can you create those goal-scoring chances for those wide midfielders, for those secondary attacking players for this Philly team? And can you have enough defensive shape when you do attack, directly to be prepared for Columbus to come back at you? But this thing should be a track meet, and that's must-watch stuff.
Yeah, I think that this is slightly ahead of Vancouver LAFC for me as like the game I'm looking forward to. That'll be in the top three. Let me take that. This is low-key a really good fixture list this weekend. But sticking here with, again, the top line is going to be the stylistic differences, and it's going to be the narrative of Daniel Gazdag returning to Philly. What kind of reception is he going to get? Again, you joked about Philly fans in general, but from the way that I've received a lot of the news I've broken around this team.
Yeah, it's not.
I think
him.
the fans are like, I get it, Gazdag. If you
Yeah.
wanted a new, like, you know, it's like, I don't think, like, it wasn't like an acrimonious departure, even
Well,
though
the other
I'm
thing
certain
is-
the fans wish that he stayed.
Yeah, and now it's gone well. So like, you can't be mad really at any party. Philly's continued to win. They've continued to get results, and Gazdag's gone and hasn't hit huge yet, but like looks comfortable in Columbus and looks like a key ad. So I wonder if that sort of affects the energy around it too. Of like, it's not, you know, this redemption arc moment. It's sort of just like, yeah, we were all sort of done with this phase of our life, and then we moved on. And it's a huge game because it's the top two teams in the Eastern Conference. And then I think for both of us, we keyed the Minnesota-Miami game as another huge game this weekend.
Yeah.
And Miami, with the game in
clash of
hand,
styles.
are hunting at the top of the Eastern Conference. They now, Supporters Shield is their next trophy to go for. And you have to think they're going to be pretty committed and focused on it. I think we saw it in the performance against Red Bulls. But yeah, clash of styles. Minnesota are built to beat Miami, and yet we said that about LAFC, and LAFC couldn't get it done. So, like, the question here is, can Minnesota be great enough at what they do to be able to knock off Miami and get, I think, 3 points and not just a draw?
Yeah, and look, like, it's always going to be difficult playing Miami, but Minnesota United are at home, and they are a good team. You can't have both of the, hey, like, give us more respect, like, we should, but then, like, oh, it's on, like, oh, we got to draw against Miami, like, that's good, right? So they have to be coming into this game, like, knowing that, hey, if we do what we do well, if we execute that, we should win. And that's how they should be looking at this. Minnesota are dead last in MLS in possession, and it's not close. They have 37%. Second to last is St. Louis at 41%. That's how they want it. They know that they need to add kind of another dimension or be a little bit more dangerous in with the ball. That's not something that they're going to need to practice this weekend against Miami. What they're going to get to do is what they're the best at. What they are great at is the defensive structure and hitting you decisively and quickly on the counter and being high energy and everything else that comes with it. So I think this is going to be a fascinating game between these two teams. And like you said, guys, like, I'm trying to say I think Minnesota is going to win, except it feels like every time I've been like, oh, that team matches up well with Miami, like you said with LAFC.
Yeah.
And then they didn't, even when they had the game state exactly how they would have wanted it. Vancouver was the team that gave Miami the most problems because they actually wanted to play with the ball. Teams like Charlotte played against Miami when Miami went down a man. It's like you didn't notice that they were down a man because they were still using the ball. Like, so maybe there will be a way for Minnesota to try to control the game a little bit more than they have with the ball, but like it's gonna be curious to see which style wins out.
So one of the ways we think that you could do that is by starting Julian Gressel, which is a funny little factor in all of this.
Yeah.
We have the question from Paolo in the chat who says Gressel hat trick in this one.
Hat trick of assist, maybe.
Yeah, that's a return game for him. He would bring a little bit more of that possession. I don't think Minnesota will lean that way in this one because
I don't think so.
My guess would be Minnesota would say we're better at that than everyone else. That we think Kelvin Yeboah 1v1 against any of these players in the back line, that we think that if we play into the channels and our back post finishers and our back post runners, that we'll create chances that no one else does in this matchup. And I think that's fair, right? Bouanga has to come inside to score those chances. Also, they were all there for him. He just didn't put them away. And I think for Minnesota, for large parts of this season, up until this last little run, they had put them away too. They have not beaten a team yet, I think, that we're saying like is a blue blood 2025 MLS Cup contender.
Yeah.
Part of that is the issue in the Western Conference. We still just don't know who that is. But, so that's where the opportunity is here for Minnesota, is to say, you know, this is a chance to win this game and say, yep, we're in the convo with all these Eastern Conference teams. You guys all want to fall over. You want to talk about all these teams and their styles and whatever. Well, we're there with them. And so I think for Minnesota, that's where this game becomes super important.
I totally agree. And so this one kicks off at 4:30 on Saturday. At the same time, Toronto's playing DC United in what I would like to call how much do I hate myself to put on a second screen for this game. And I will, because
Lock
I do.
in, baby.
So,
That's
and that's all I've got on Toronto DC. And that's all I want to say.
This is what I'm talking about with Tom, which is he puts in the work all behind the scenes all week to be ready for the big moments as he tries to struggle and get over it. We each had two under the radar games that we were stoked about. Yours was Portland SKC. My guess is you're expecting, let me set the line here, 5.5 goals.
Oh, dude, it's a blind over for these kind of games, and I think that there's going to be a lot of similar strands. The other one, and I hope that you weren't about to say it, Colorado San Jose. That's like those are the two later games.
Yeah,
those two games, I'm just expecting chaos and fun unpredictability.
I need a Darren Yappy brace in that game. The openings are there. I need him to take advantage of it. Colorado have been fun to watch the last few weeks. I like the pairing up top with Navajo and Yappy. Navajo is like 70% great at everything, and I don't know that there's one role to put him in, and I like the idea of changing it every once in a while so that you could see more of his buildup, more of his creativity. Then you see more of his finishing on the end of things. I don't know that I would say this is the permanent way I would set up, but I like putting it together this way and like giving him a chance to do this for some stretches of the season. No, my under the radar one was Orlando, New England. I said it, Orlando unbeaten now in 10 across all comps, 8 in MLS play. I think someone put in the chat 6 shutouts in a row. That can't be right, so feel free to correct me on that one. And for the Revs, we have talked about 4-game win streak. They have been the best defensive team in the league in the last month. And so you get, again, clash of styles. I think this is a bit of a gut check for both these teams. Where do they stand? Who are they? And I think for this Revs team, most of all, they are trying to prove that they're a real, contender for a playoff spot. And so this is their I think this is a big opportunity. I thought the performance and result in Rhode Island was really good for this team. And I think it showed that I have talked about it for 2 years now. This is a good academy. They've built a good academy. They've pushed a lot of good players. The Bruce to Caleb bridge broke some of the momentum outside of Peyton Miller for some of these players. So to have a game where you could get them on the field, you win, so you're getting another Open Cup game, a chance to play a lot of these kids as well. I think all of that was super positive.
I totally agree. And to do a little housekeeping, 6 games, shutout streak. They have not conceded a goal since March 29th in a 2-1 win over.
You've got me out here talking about this Revs shutout streak, and they've only conceded 1 goal in games, and they've never conceded more than 2. And under the radar, I am not even picking it. I think part of the issue is you had the 0-0s. That's what
3-0 draw. 4-0 draws over.
And the one at Montreal feels tough because Montreal has failed to win. I watched a large chunk of that Philly one. It was obviously a good return from the opening game where they got blown out by Philly. Yeah. But it didn't feel as secure for this group. But this Orlando squad, they have come together, and it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Again, I think this is legitimately a very good team in the East, and I think that they're going to be here by the end of the season. They haven't had a great run where because early in the season when they were putting up goals, there was a couple soft ones conceded by Galese, and we were like, hey, they need another center back. All this, they've fixed that, but it's. I don't know if this is correlation or causation that the attack has kind of slowed down a bit outside of beating Tampa Bay in the Open Cup of that explosion of 5 goals. Orlando is a very fun team to watch. I think they are a very good team. If I could just make one more note about Colorado San Jose, because I think at the moment this is my favorite stat so far of the year. San Jose Earthquakes are first in MLS in expected goals with 25. The San Jose Earthquakes are last in MLS in expected goals against with 22. So this team. There's more goals in this team, in games that this team plays, or more expected goals than any other in the league, and I think that that's fun.
And somewhat expected, they went out and invested a ton in this team. Most of it was in the front of the field and on guys that don't really defend or counter press or help with those
and then
things.
A couple draft picks at center back.
Yeah. And then Bo LaRue just trying to keep the whole thing together with tape and string and rubber bands and everything like that. On the Orlando side, they've obviously switched to this 4-4-2. It was working for a little while. I do think it has gotten the best out of Luis Muriel, but it has maybe also tamped down some of the overall attack for this team. I would just play Ivan Angulo at fullback sometimes. Don't fake it. Don't play around. Don't shift into a wing back setup. Don't start a center back at fullback. To me, I think Angulo he's like the non-American DeMarcus Beasley, right? We always said Beasley's such a good defensive winger that he could be a fullback. And then he did. Mm-hmm. And he was pretty good at it. He started in World Cups. And I think Angulo can do something similar, and I think it could spark more of the attack if you have more threats out there on the field and you have a little bit more space. A lot of that then predicated on Ojeda's health and all of that as well. And maybe Caraballo gets his way onto a starting lineup. This is going to be a fun one. As I said, we're excited for the weekend to come. If you're watching live again, go over, check out the podcast with Joe Larry. We'll talk a little bit more in there. If you're listening to the podcast, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I will have my weekend recap coming up on Monday. Got another big week of coverage coming next week as well. Tom, I know you have to go and call Karl Anthony Towns and call Karl Towns Sr. and celebrate New Jersey in all its glory and everything else like that. This is what we do. This is what we live for. So thank you to all of you for listening once again. Thank you to all of you live in the chat for joining us. And we'll talk to you all again very, very soon.